Hey everyone, I think we're live now. Thank you for joining us for this Plan B webinar. Of course, the topic is SaaS funding and M&A landscape in the post-COVID world. Obviously, there are a lot of relevant things to talk about here. Before I start, if I could get a confirmation that we have a decent feed. So in the chat window, if you guys could just say yes or no. Yeah, we got a couple of confirmation. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to just introduce the speakers before we start. We of course have both the speakers today, very famous people, Dave and Klaas. So Dave brings nearly 20 years of operating experience. Of course, he's the current managing director of Lightspeed Partners and Advisors India. He's made investments in companies like Baidu, Darwinbot, OpenTech, and ShareChat. He is also the charter member of the Indus Entrepreneurs, that is TIE. Prior to Lightspeed, Dave was an investment professional at Venrock in Silicon Valley, where he focused on early stage investments. Uh, and of course, uh, he's obviously done a lot of things in the investment space. Obviously, then he holds a BS in economics from Wharton, a BS in computer science and engineering from the University of Pennsylvania, and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Now we have, of course, Klaas Oskam. He's based out of Bangalore, and he's a managing director and leads DC Advisory India. He brings more than 21 years of investment and banking experience to the firm, with the last 18 years spent focusing on TMT, M&A, and private placements. Over the past 10 years, he has personally led and closed more than 30 transactions across various sectors with a combined equity value in excess of 1.5 billion USD. So prior to this, Klaas worked with as the director in the investment banking team of Ernst and Young. He holds an MSc in economics and finance from Groningen University. I hope I got that correct. So I'm done with the intro. I'd like to move on to Klaas. I'll just be presenting your screenshot.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much, John. And whilst I'm presenting this, Dave, if there's stuff that you'd want to add to these slides, do chime in. I think, Giant, we can move up 2 slides to the slide number 3. Yeah, so I think this kind of picture says it all. SaaS, of course, something that has kind of been invested in India for the last 10 years or so. It's really, in the last couple of years, come of age. And 2019 was really a breakout year. In terms of number of transactions, actually, it was flattish, same number of transactions as the year before, at around 115 funding rounds that happened. But the value of those combined 115 funding rounds has gone up a lot, where in 2018, total funding volume was kind of 650 million alt, so on average about 150 million a quarter. In 2019, the total funding volume has more than doubled to more than 1.4 billion, with several quarters where funding volumes were north of 400 million, and one quarter almost 500 million. And that's really driven more by the ecosystem getting more mature and a number of companies starting to scale and attracting larger Series B plus, Series C, D funding rounds. Actually, if you look at the seed and Series A stage, then funding volumes were quite flat, and funding values also were fairly flat. At the seed stage, there was growth from an average size of $700,000 to 1.2 million in 2019. Series A was kind of, in terms of value, flat. But it's really been that boost in the later stage both funding volumes as well as the funding values. That's kind of more than doubled the total funding volume for. And if we say India SaaS, that includes kind of some US headquartered firms that have Indian founders and have an Indian backend, because here in a lot of situations, companies are hybrid and it's hard to say if it's a US or an Indian company. But all in all, very different from what this ecosystem looked like 5 years ago. And definitely for scaled up assets there, before the COVID situation hit, there was a lot of funding available. We're moving on to the next slide. Yeah. Giant, could you move to the next slide? Yeah. Then within SaaS, of course, the two broad categories are horizontal SaaS versus vertical SaaS. And what we're seeing is that in terms of number of transactions, it's about 60-40 split, 60% going into horizontal by number of transactions, 40% going into vertical. But then if you look into funding dollars, it's even more skewed towards horizontal, where, on average, 75% of the funding dollars has been going into horizontal platforms and 25% has been going into vertical platforms. And the two reasons that we see for that, one is, horizontal typically tends to have a larger TAM than vertical, and that attracts investors. Secondly, as we'll come on the presentation later as well, horizontal tends to have more attractive valuations, a deeper exit market, IPO market. So that again also attracts more investor dollars, but both are of course sizable segments. Moving on, Giant. I think this says it all. Won't dive into this too deep, but if you look at it, the last 12 months has seen 12 transactions of more than 50 million, which was something which was pretty rare. And if you look at 2018, there were only 3 funding transactions which are $50 million plus involving Indian SaaS businesses. So clearly we see more maturity, especially at the larger scale. If you then look at what are the key sectors where subsectors on the horizontal side which have attracted the maximum funding, then in particular CRM stands out, which covers not just CRM but also customer support and some MarTech, marketing technologies. But also fairly healthy activities in finance and accounting and productivity collaboration, even pre-COVID. So already a fair bit of activity, and we expect, of course, that productivity and collaboration and dev tools will actually start to see more activity in the post-COVID world. Moving on. Whilst on the funding side, it's already a pretty mature ecosystem with, as said, almost $1.5 billion of funding value in the 2019. On the M&A side, it's still a much more nascent ecosystem. With in the last 12 months, only 4 transactions upwards of $50 million. And that's really to do with a lot of these companies that have started to break out, are anywhere between 3 to 7 years old, and in many of cases they're still stay private, backed by strong financial sponsors, and are working their way up towards being of IPO size or being of large M&A size. Prime examples would be, the Freshworks of this world, or the Druvas of this world, which have hit a scale where they can IPO, but it's something which in a pre-COVID world might maybe happen in 12 to 18 months. Now that could kind of get postponed in the post-COVID world. But clearly on the M&A side, the ecosystem is less mature. Still relatively modest number of greater than $25 million transactions, and around 85% of the transactions are below 25 million, and those are typically either acqui-hires or small business purchases where assets or the shares get purchased and there's some value attached to the IP. Obviously, one will always see that skew towards because a lot of companies don't break out and hence will fall into this sub 25 million bucket when they get acquired. But all in all, the fact that we're seeing about 115 funding transactions a year, whereas over the last 3 years combined, we've seen 105 M&A transactions. So roughly a third of the volume of funding transactions is the number of M&A transactions. That tells you that it's still, when it comes to M&A, an ecosystem under development. Obviously, one would always expect some more funding transactions because a lot of companies will take multiple rounds of funding before they see an IPO or a trade sale exit. One thing that we do expect here, obviously, is that in the post-COVID world, there will be definitely a step up in the number of smaller transactions and acqui-hires, as funding rounds will be getting harder to get by, and hence, more companies might be forced to take the M&A route. I think the other interesting one to see from this slide, and we've not put out all the transactions that are there. We've kind of more focused on either the larger ones on the left-hand side or on the ones with more well-known logos. But what's interesting to see and what's changed in the last 2 years is that it's not only the global majors such as a Walmart and Cisco that have kind of done transactions in the India market, PayPal, American Express, but that we are also starting to see some regional champions and some local consolidators with GM and Reliance doing transactions, Flipkart having made an acquisition on the AI side, and the likes of an Airtel. And obviously on the acqui-hire side, Freshworks also having been fairly active. So again, that's a sign that the ecosystem is starting to mature more, that there is both interest from the global majors in Indian SaaS businesses, but there is also a larger pool of local scaled up businesses that see value in the IPs and the teams that have started to break out. And any comments from your side here, Dave?
I guess my only comment here is this is a super early.
Yeah.
These numbers show a super early ecosystem for M&A. On the left-hand side, on the acquirer side, I don't see too many of the typical acquirers even. The typical acquirers are enterprise software, enterprise technology companies that are typically worth $10 billion or more in public market cap, your SAPs and Salesforces and all of that. So those people have not even begun to play here. And my only point there would be that to even be relevant for those companies, they're looking for much greater scale, $50 million plus in ARR. And I think that it'll be a while before, a lot of Indian companies get to that scale. So in the meantime, I think it's going to remain anemic. I think this conversation, once we get into the Q&A section, we'll talk about sort of the acqui-hire side and perhaps about what to do to manage through this COVID sort of era. But very, very early.
Yeah, very early. Our assessment is that there's now about 40 to 50 $10 million ARR plus SaaS companies in India. And that number, has to grow, probably 4 or 5 fold. And out of those will be the companies which are 50 million ARR plus, which is literally now, under 10, that number, starting to approach 10. As you see more of those, we'll see more of the larger names. And if you go further back in time, then Salesforce has done one purchase, and VMware has. But if that happens once in 10 years, that's not really that shows an extremely early ecosystem. Okay, let's move to the next slide, Giant. Move on. So I think obviously, and this will be on the mind of everyone who's raising funding, what's happened to public markets, because what happens to public market valuations drives also what happens to private market funding and M&A valuations. And there we've clearly seen that the drop in valuations on the vertical side has been more pronounced, and that too of a much lower base multiple of 6x pre-COVID, trailing 12-month ARR, whereas at the horizontal side pre-COVID had an average valuation of 10.5 times trailing 12-month ARR. And on the horizontal side, that's kind of dropped to 8x, a 23% drop, whereas on the vertical side, we've almost seen double the drop from 6x to 3.4x. So clearly, the public markets view is that vertical software SaaS companies have been impacted and will be impacted more, and hence the bigger drop in valuations that we've seen there. Okay, then we'll go to the last slide, and here, again, we'll ask Dave to chime in as well, but, quickly summarizing what are some of the house views. We definitely expect next 12 months that $1.5 billion funding record that we saw in 2019 will not be achieved in the current year, and in the first half of next year, we expect it also still to be more muted. And the volume drop, the value drop might be actually bigger than the volume drop, because our view is that it's more the mid and late stage that will see a more significant contraction, whereas at the early stage, seed and Series A, there will be contraction as well, but it will be a less pronounced contraction. Then, for a lot of companies, I think what's quite special about SaaS is, and if you look at the last 24 months, and then 80% plus of the funding rounds that have happened have been external led, with a lot of investor buoyancy to join funding rounds, lead funding rounds, and that's something that we do expect that will change, and that we'll see of the rounds that happen, that a much more significant portion of those will be more internally led, and a drop in the number of externally led. Then I think I already touched upon this. We do expect that on the horizontal side, the funding might be lesser impacted, and on the horizontal side, you also see a number of net beneficiaries from the situation, any remote productivity tools, DevOps, cloud, security, businesses which are, either not impacted or in some cases even positively benefiting. And obviously, the IPO market, at least for the next 3-4 quarters, is going to be near shut. So that's another feature that we'll see, probably less relevant for the audience here because most of you are early stage. What will we see on the M&A side? Every funding becoming more difficult to get by. We expect more distressed M&A, more acqui-hires, and we'll, when we do the Q&A session, probably go into a bit more detail when we think you should start to think about it if you're having a hard time getting attention on the fundraising side. We do expect that more and globally, because in India, as I said, it's still a nascent ecosystem, but a drop in cash-based M&A. But we also taking a bit more of a 12 to 21 more 4-month view, as David kind of pointed out. There's still very few acquisitions by big tech in the Indian ecosystem, as Cisco has done maybe 2 in the last 2 years. but the likes of Google, Salesforce, SAP, Oracle still missing. We do think that and some of those will, if there's good IPs out there, selectively look at acqui-hires like Walmart has already done and Cisco has already done. Secondly, as some of the larger ones start to scale, we will see more activity there, but it's going to be very selective. All in all, a good developing ecosystem on the funding side that will now see obviously a very different funding environment for the next 12 to 18 months. A still nascent ecosystem when it comes to M&A.
And I'll just add some commentary to this. I think I've been now in the tech ecosystem since 1998, and I saw the 2000 bust when I was in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley, and then the 2008 bust post the financial crisis, and then in India in 2016 there was a downturn. I wouldn't call it a bust, but there was certainly a downturn at that time. And so, having seen these, let's say 2.5 cycles, I don't think we should all overreact just because it's a down cycle. I think there's actually a lot of opportunity here. And actually hearing this data and listening to this, acqui-hires and trying to get sold and all that is never anyway an ideal outcome. But in India, there's not even much of a market for it, as far as I can tell. So I think the answer right now is to build and build and build. And the strategies I've seen that worked in 2008, at least, when the SaaS ecosystem had emerged in the US, and then beyond that over here, is just go back to your customers, anybody who's paying you anything, and just sit down with them, understand their business. It's an opportunity for you to find out a deeper set of requirements and build for those requirements. It's less of a time to go out and acquire new customers, although we're seeing some companies doing that if they can key in on a mission critical requirement that has come up right now during this COVID period. But otherwise, I think you have to go back to your existing customers and focus on expansion revenue over there. It's actually not a bad time to be doing this. If you can deepen relationships with existing customers and grow your revenue that way, you actually have an advantage against very large companies out there. Large companies have a huge cost base. Their revenues, if you're a Salesforce selling in India or SAP selling in the US, a 10% drop in your sales is billions of dollars of drop, and that's
Dave, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there seems to be a lot of echo. Could you possibly turn it on and off the mic?
On and off the mic, okay. Is that any better?
Little better.
Continue.
What I can do is use.
Or maybe turn off your video for 1 second and we can check that way.
Is this any better?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It is? Okay. All right. So what I was saying, I still hear some echo, but hopefully it's better.
Klaas? Oh, yeah.
Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So what I was saying was large companies, whether it's SAP, Salesforce, Adobe, or Nutanix, or anybody else who's selling out there that's public, I mean, they have numbers they have to meet for Wall Street. They've all withdrawn guidance. A 10%, 20% drop in their sales is an earth-shaking event for them that sends their organizations into a spin if that happens. And so you guys as startups with whatever it is, $100,000 in ARR or 50,000 or $1 million in ARR are an advantage. And so, you can go back to your customers. You don't have to answer to Wall Street, and you can get deeper into those customers, build product for them, and you actually might come out stronger from this downturn, relatively speaking, than some of the larger companies can relative to their position pre-COVID. So I think this is an opportunity. And I'm actually hopeful. I've seen this happen many times where companies have gone into a downturn, gained market share, gained new products and features, built new products and features, and come out sort of accelerating into sort of the post-downturn world. So that would be my message over here, especially given sort of the very nascent M&A market here in India. But having said that, I have a couple of questions I want to ask Klaas, and then we'll go over to the questions in the question section on the right. I see a couple over there, actually several over there already. Klaas?
Just one thing, can I shut the presentation right now? Klaas, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think you can.
You can shut the presentation.
Okay. So Klaas, who are the potential acquirers in India, even if somebody wanted to sell to? From the list I saw there, actually, maybe even more than half were consumer companies that seem to be acquiring core tech of some kind. When do you have you even seen international software companies prospecting in India for buying anything? Or is the idea here that Indian companies have to land up in, Waldorf or in, Palo Alto or somewhere else and really be relevant in those markets to be potentially acquired?
So I think we've typically seen that for the few that have seen the attention of global buyers, that it's situations where there's a strong front end in the US typically, and a management team who's well entrenched in that local ecosystem. And those are the situations where you see what we call anomaly outcomes, where there is a gap in VMware's portfolio, which bought Arc, and it didn't show on the slide because it happened in 2016, or Cisco buying a Cloud Cherry, and where the team had also moved to the US. So often we see that for the global tech majors to pay attention, and you need to be visible in their market, and they typically also really only value customer references in their main markets, predominantly the US market. So I put it down more to a situation where it's a combination of just not too many companies of scale, and that we've seen not too many of those. I think the other one that's probably gonna help change this is that you see more and more kind of executives in the Bay Area who are Indian origin and who are coming out of big tech companies to start their own software companies. And they often have a better view on what are the gaps inside the portfolios of the large tech companies, and how to kind of scale, listen to customers, and attract funding. So we already started to see some of those examples, and where the India leg of it is more a cost-effective product development center. So those, so we are hopeful that we'll see more of those, but it's still going to be a trickle. We agree with you that most of the acqui-hiring, bearing say a Freshworks, that has happened from an India standpoint has been more on the consumer side, with the likes of Walmart, Flipkart, etc., adding core IPs relevant to them, and that's a function to us because not too many Indian SaaS companies have reached really scale. Once you have more, Freshworks, Zoho, and Druva-sized ones, you will start to see more of those acqui-hires by India-based SaaS companies as well.
One last question, and then we'll go to the questions here in the question section. The numbers you presented were sort of pre-COVID mostly, and during COVID, it's not as if too many financings or M&A deals have happened or may even happen. But what does it take, do you think, for somebody to get a seed financing or Series A financing done in this environment? And I'll add my thoughts to that as well.
I'd love to. Typically, always a seed required a minimum viable product and some first kind of recognition from that customers are willing to pay for that minimum viable product. And so often somewhere in between, say, 50K to 100K of revenue. And for Series A, we often saw that anywhere between 500,000 and 1 million in ARR was kind of what was a threshold for Series A. That's what we've kind of typically seen. But I think what one also needs to keep in mind is that there are exceptions to the rule. There are companies out there because they have such a disruptive IP, and we've seen that, for instance, in DevTools with someone like, say, a Postman, who can raise substantial Series A, even being pre-revenue, because if it becomes first an adoption story, and if you can show that your product is well accepted by a lot of developers out there, and then that in due course there can be kind of monetization. But for those keeping out those exceptions, if it's more a kind of generic horizontal play, a generic vertical play, where there might be other companies in that space and not a completely disruptive IP, I would say that pre-COVID we typically saw that at seed stage, minimum viable product, 50K to 100K of kind of annualized revenue, and at Series A, typically 500,000 to 1 million of ARR is what kind of got funding rounds done. Obviously, with high growth as well, and quality reference customers.
Yeah. When it comes to Klaas, if you can go on mute, given the echo. When it comes to this financing environment during the COVID, during this period, I think there's two effects at work. One is that a lot of investors are busy with their existing portfolio, where that took up a minority of our time beforehand. It's taking up a majority of our time. A lot of us are working with portfolio to extend cash runway to beyond sort of 18 months to 24 months, which is when we see sort of more of a fuller recovery happening. And so that's taking up a lot of our time. That consequently crunches the time we can look at new companies. In many cases, crunches it down to zero. So while we're all open for business, there are existing portfolio companies that are taking up time. I know for speaking for ourselves at Lightspeed, we have companies, new companies that we are looking at right now and doing our diligence on. So we're keeping the lights on from that perspective. The second effect here is that the risk appetite of a lot of investors does decrease in a time like this, specifically to do with volatility of demand. We don't know what demand is going to be like. It depends. It depends on the sector you're in of enterprise software or SaaS. But in many cases, demand is going to be choppy. You might have a little bit higher churn. Some customers are going to come to you and ask you for 3, 6, 9-month forbearance on payments. There are some sectors that are seeing some lift. I know there was a question here on conversational AI. We've got a company in this space called Yellow Messenger, but there are many others in this space. And that is one space that seems to be seeing some lift because it automates customer support, which is tough to do these days for a lot of people because you can't go to work to call centers and to contact centers. But there are some other spaces. Collaboration is the obvious example. Zoom being the example that's most used out there. But I think AirMeet itself is probably seeing a lot of lift in this environment. Uh, Collaboration has gone from being very horizontal, so something like this, which can be used for any type of meeting, to being very vertical. So you can have collaboration software for sales, collaboration software for marketing, for design, with companies like Figma and so on. So there's a lot of stuff going on in collaboration that can potentially see lift over here. And some vertical specific areas, healthcare in the US might see some lift given everything going on with COVID. Better software to track patients, to diagnose patients, to triage patients. All of that is seeing some demand. So those are some areas that might see lift, but if not that, I would just go back to what I said earlier. Go back to your existing customers, even if just two of them, or three of them, or five of them, and just have those conversations. The technical term we use in on the SaaS side is QBRs, so quarterly meetings, quarterly business reviews. But have it with them. You obviously can't go meet them, but have an air meet with them or a Zoom with them, and find out what their business problems are. What are they facing as a company, and figure out how your product can become mission critical to them, and then change your product, package it differently. To your website, hopefully has changed completely between pre-COVID and now. If not, please do change it. Make it very relevant to what's going on right now. So I'll switch to some of the questions over here. There are some consumery questions which I'm going to try and skip, but then otherwise let me get to some of the others.
Dave, can I just have 10 seconds?
Yeah.
Uh, of course, sorry everyone for the disturbance in the start, but just a quick thing. I'm just putting a link in the chat window, which is our survey form. So just ensure that you fill that survey form before you leave the session. It'll be really helpful for us to plan future sessions and get your feedback. So thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jayant. So we had a question here for from Kranti Kiran. We're a pre-revenue startup for remote collaboration for cross-functional teams. Should we look out for funding or stick to revenue generation? Well, I'd have to know more about the company, but my guess is the funding scene right now is fairly anemic, as we've just discussed, and is going to get more anemic. I would just focus on customers and revenue, and trying to survive through the next 12 to 18 months on whatever capital you have right now. Just get deeper. This is a great time to build product, get deeper into your customers, build stuff that's mission critical, like I said before. And you have an advantage against the large companies out there, which are in a world of hurt right now. Jayant, is there a way for a conversation to happen between attendees and us, or is this all?
No, there is a way. So, guys, if you want to actually come and talk on the feed, you just need to raise your hand. So, anyone who wants to ask their questions directly, just raise their hand. You can directly give access to your camera and mic, and we can see you on the live feed then. So, I would highly encourage that some of you start raising your hands.
Okay, meanwhile, I'll go to the next question from Smart Hire AI. What can be the situation for the HR tech startup based on chatbot and contextual resume screening using AI looking for fundraise and 4C market? I think...
I actually got him online, Dave. This is Ramesh from Smart Hire AI.
Yeah. Hi, just a general sort of guideline for questions over here. Let's ask questions that will also benefit everybody else in the audience and are not specific to your company or your sector necessarily, because this is a learning session for all of us. If you have specific company-specific questions, we can address those afterwards offline.
Oh, okay. Then in that case, if I have to put it in a generic way, for the companies who have just started their journey with the customers who have beta tested their products, and then who are in the phase of fundraising, how do you see that? Would this be a right time for them to go for M&A, or should they wait and then see how the market reacts? This would be the to put my question in a more generic way.
Klaas, any thoughts of that on that? I can add something.
Yeah, I can go first. Look, I do think, and Dave covered this, in a lot of situations, this is the right market to build. And on the M&A side, a lot of folks are kind of distracted. They're, as Dave put it in the world of Word, internally focused. If there is runway, I would still say that your best bet is to kind of build, get your product better accepted by the market, get more customers in for that. If that option kind of and the runway is not there, then you would want to kind of in dual track have discussions with early stage funders as well as get the attention of acqui-hire candidates in your industry. And I would start relatively early because many of those conversations take time to cultivate, especially if people need to appreciate how you fit into their broader product stack. So you don't want to start a acqui-hire discussion 3 months before you run out of capital. Then it's definitely going to be a fire sale. So if you're feeling that you're I would say 9 to 12 months of capital left, and at that point in time you're not getting enough traction on funding conversations, is when you definitely should start to explore M&A conversations with folks relevant in the ecosystem, your IP and your team's capability.
Okay. Okay.
Add to that,
Thanks.
I think, look, let's not.
Just 1 second, just a reminder to all the people raising their hand to mute their mic after they ask the question, please. So mute your mic, Ramesh.
Yeah, just to add to what Klaas said, I know this is an extreme situation in the world broadly, and it feels like, we don't know what's going to happen after this. However, all I can tell you is that having seen past down cycles and up cycles, we will get through this. We will be in a world where it may not look exactly like what it looked like, 3 months ago, but there will be a world where there is demand from enterprises, there is innovation out there, financings are happening, M&A will pick up. We'll all go back to normal. It won't look exactly the same, a bit different, but it'll go back. And so based on that observation, at least expectation of life in general, I'd say let's not overreact. There's no need to sell the company just because we're in this situation. Of course, if the company's out of cash, that's a different, reality. But we'll be back. Everything will be back at some point. If not next 3 to 6 months, give it a year, we'll be back. And if anything, I've seen over the last 8 years of being an investor here in India and 6 years before that in Silicon Valley, and then being a founder myself before that, is that Indian entrepreneurs are resilient. They find ways to make ends meet, extract revenue from customers, survive. What's the term that Y Combinator uses? Ramen profitable. Sort of just go back to basics and just build from there. Be really efficient. I don't think we should overreact here to things in general. There's a lot of scope for building product companies out of India. We've seen two types emerge from India, broadly speaking, that we are investing behind. I think I mentioned this earlier. One was companies focusing on the India market. I think a lot of investors historically have been negative on enterprise software companies, SaaS companies selling to Indian customers. I think that is changing. We're seeing that directly in our portfolio. Companies like Darwinbox, which are focusing on India and Southeast Asia, Yellow Messenger, focusing on India and Southeast Asia, consistently seeing accounts paying them 100K, 200K, 300K, in many cases, $500,000 a year in India and Southeast Asia today. And that wasn't the case a few years ago for Indian startups. It was the case for these enterprises, the largest enterprises in India, paying SAP or Oracle or enterprise software companies from elsewhere. But it is happening for Indian startups now. So that's one strong vein of opportunity that is building and will continue to build. The second one is Indian companies selling into the US and global markets. That's the one that we all, of course, all talk about. There's deep markets there. There's lots of niches there still left unexplored, vertical SaaS, small pieces of larger functions, developer ecosystem, and so on. So there's a lot out there. We are very, very hopeful. We'll come out. We've seen this many times before. We'll come out of it. Technology buying will not go away. Vendors will not go away. There might be a rearranging of sort of the league tables on the software vendor side, but we will endure. So I think don't think about M&A unless you've completely run out of cash or something.
Yeah, no, I agree, Dave. And probably two more things to add. I think that actually Indian startups are the better situation because cost structures are much lower, much more nimble. So you have the ability to make the rupee run much longer with rupee cost structures versus dollar cost structures, and more quickly move towards a kind of low burn compared to folks who operate with much higher cost structures. So I think that's to our benefit. I think the other one is, and I've also seen two downturns. I've typically seen financial markets have a 6 to 8 quarter memory. And then things can be radically different again. If you already have the ability, and that's why a lot of people and investors now focus on being funded for 18 to 24 months or kind of changing your cost structures to ensure that you have runway for 18 to 24 months. And if I look at that 18 to 24 months, then actually there's most likely going to be a long-term benefit to SaaS because people will be much more comfortable working out of the cloud. Digitization is going to get fast forwarded because of this entire COVID episode. And it's not just in collaboration, it's also in areas like security, where because of much more work from home, much faster accelerated digitization, hiring your case, more and more done through video conference, which creates much more data that can then be analyzed digitally as well. So there's going to be a lot of situations where, on account of digitization moving forward, the prospects, if you look 18 to 24 months out, for tech companies are actually going to be very positive. And we do feel that tech will actually bounce back faster and better than a lot of other, more analog offline type of verticals that don't have that benefit of that the bump of the fast forward of digitization.
Could we go to the question from the raised hand from Amit Gauba?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Amit, you can. Amit, can you hear us? Seems like he's not online. We have another one from Karishma.
Hi, Dave.
Hey.
Hi, Klaas. Thank you so much for your time. I had a quick question about the edtech sector. I know Lightspeed obviously has invested in Clever and Byju's, and I'm curious to learn and hear more about, there's talk of edtech doing very well, having lots of signups and kids and teachers trying to get online. I wanted to understand from like a financial point of view if that's really quite working out, or is that mainly just marketing on that front? So, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this session is specifically about SaaS companies. Are you talking about SaaS companies in EdTech?
Yes, I am. Specifically, like a Byju's online learning specifically, yes.
But Byju's is not a SaaS company. It's more of a consumer-facing content company. But SaaS companies, I would expect sort of software being sold into schools to help those schools, manage themselves, an ERP for schools, and
something like a Desmos maybe, or a Kahoot that also is used as a subscription.
Okay, I'm not familiar with those companies, but generally when it comes to SaaS for the education sector, I've been not that positive generally. It's just hard to sell into schools and universities. There's obviously Blackbaud, Black B-A-U-D, which is a company in this sector that has grown big, but they also haven't become very, very big. They've been sort of the 800-pound gorilla in a small pond. I'm mixing my metaphors. Sorry for that, but uh, that space has not gotten big. It just feels like sort of schools are SMBs in a way. Each school is different. Yeah, there are some chains of schools, but most schools are small. They don't necessarily have a clear financial objective or a clear educational perspective, if you ask me. Um, and so, I actually don't know what the motivations are in many cases of these schools and technology that they buy. We obviously had a big disaster in smart classes a few years ago. I forget the name of the company that went
Educom.
Educomp. Yeah, that was selling and financing its own equipment and basically getting no cash flow. And so that space has been challenged. B2C education is a whole different ballgame and has seen a big lift. Byju's has seen a big lift in the number of downloads per month coming in, as well as conversions. They've also launched live tutoring, which, given a lot of kids at home today, these days around the world, that's taken off really well. So these are legitimate companies. Education spending by consumers is a vast, vast market, endless markets. These are not winner take all markets. We'll see lots of companies grow big and get into hundreds and billions of dollars of revenue each. So we're very positive on the consumer facing side, fairly pessimistic on the B2B side of education software.
Yeah, now I can add to that. Look, on the consumer side, this is a major boost, and we're seeing across the board, and not just with the market leaders like Byju's, but other players seeing massive growth in MAUs, DAUs. Obviously, this is going to disrupt the offline tutorials business big time, and so from that standpoint. This is a big boost to that ecosystem, and we're working with several companies. And those are absolutely companies that will have access to funding in this market because they're clearly net beneficiaries to the current situation. I would largely concur with Dave's view on kind of B2B edtech, and more so catering to schools. But we have started to see one or two exceptions where people have a fantastic school in the box type of product that it does more than just curriculum. It does also school administration. It starts to do and enable schools to do online sessions to traditional schools. But yes, I think I concur with Dave. It's not been easy to collect from Indian schools, and have we seen those models typically work better in the US and in where schools and universities are typically more willing to pay, and it's just easier to collect. But started to see, and the beauty is it's an extremely large. It's the number 3 category spent in India after a roof over one's head and after food. And we are very clear that that's not going to change. So from that standpoint, huge opportunities there, because this is going to create a massive disruption. And I think some of these elements were also to a certain extent offline. And what we're now hearing is that even for the big guys, consumers are much more comfortable with also a digital sales interface. So that's going to be also interesting because that can really create a next phase of growth for a lot of the consumer-focused edtech companies in India.
We had a question in the next.
Yeah, we have another question.
Yeah, we have. I just want to go back to the question section, and then we'll come back to the raised hand again. We had one from Abhishek Ikpote on how would SaaS companies that target SMBs versus enterprise evolve out of this phase? How would SMB-focused SaaS companies be evaluated for funding in the current landscape? Specifically, how drastic is the change going to be? Klaas, do you have any thoughts on that? I'm happy to go as well.
Now I have some thoughts. Look, in general, one would expect for in SMB space that you will see higher mortality. So SMB space always has this question around renewals and kind of churn. And clearly, one thing which will be big on people's minds is churn for the next 12 months is likely going to be much more pronounced and higher. And if it's not churn, just delayed collections and the likes. So I think that's general comment. At the same time, what is positive about SMB is that in virtually all situations, you already have an online sales process or insights-based sales team-based process with no physical contact to close. And obviously, and that is not getting impacted. So from that standpoint, but the number of SMBs out there having budgets will, of course, shrink. So I think those are some of the things. I think it will also purely come down to, is yours a business critical solution or is it a nice to have? And if it's business critical, then you will probably see lesser churn issues. You will only see it if people go completely out of business. And you also have to be in a better position to collect from your customers. The positive is you already have an online sales process that is not getting impacted and an online support and process, etc. The negative is you're likely to see higher churn than enterprise-focused players.
Can we go to Charan Singh of Talent Tracker, who's raised his hand?
Hi, Dave.
Hello. Hi.
Hope you're able to hear me.
Yes.
So I run a SaaS company and we are in the market almost around 12 years now. We are into recruitment automation and this current situation has impacted our business so very much because we are into a business which involved in the recruitment activities for any organization, right? In the current scenario, most of our customers, for your information, we have customers like Sony, L&T, Suzlon, Grant Thornton, some big organizations are using our product. And we are very well mature product in the market, but the problem which we are facing currently is the demand of our product is going down, and we're not getting new customers. As you know, that no company is going to increase their hirings, and we are pretty struggling in terms of new customer acquisitions and current business. So I was hearing your conversation, and you point out some very good conversations. For example, to engage your customers and to improve your product and all. So I would like to understand from you, like down the line, if you want to raise funding in future, if you want to sell our organization, so what kind of steps you will suggest us so that we will be able to get acquired with a good valuation in the market.
Yeah, I mean the thinking on going back to existing customers and deepening your offerings and relationship with them was more that acquiring new customers in this environment is tough. If customers are not recruiting, maybe there's two angles. One is go to certain sectors that are recruiting. I think I don't know what that'll be in India. Maybe it's in the healthcare space. Maybe it's I know in the US, Amazon has hired, more than 1 lakh people recently. But that's obviously a tough area to go to companies which are hiring. I think coming out of this COVID crisis, as investors, I'd be looking for something, companies that have very mission critical offerings for their customers. A lot of companies in the last 10 years that got 5-10 years that got built up in India or elsewhere on the SaaS side are sort of nice to haves as far as I can tell, and companies can continue operating without their software. So even your space, I'd say in recruiting, maybe you build something during this time frame that actually is not recruiting related, but it's more people related. If I had to abstract one level up, what is recruiting? It's people, something, right? Something about people. So can you build something else that these organizations want to do with their existing people? You have the relationships with those clients. Find out what their problems are with their existing employee base, and try and solve those in whichever way. Maybe it's communications with their employees. Maybe it's coordinating them because they're all at home. Maybe it's something else. I don't know. But you have those relationships with that CHRO or HR head. Figure out what those requirements are and build that. Coming out of this, I'd want to see companies that are laser focused on mission critical areas. I'd build some bench strength on telesales, like Klaas was saying, in the SMB side, but even on the enterprise side, we're seeing companies stopping the hiring or reducing the growth in hiring field sales and focusing on SDRs and telesales and building that out. So I'd want to see that built out a bit more and that engine working a little bit. So those are some high level thoughts, apart from the normal things that every investor wants to see in terms of ARRs and growth and those sorts of things. Maybe we'll take one final question because I know the session was supposed to end at noon. And Klaas, if you have to go at noon.
Yes. Thank you, Dev.
Yeah. But do you want to take one last question, Jayant, or do you want to finish?
It's up to you guys. I think we've reached the end of the session. So if you have another...
I'm doing one more question.
One more question. Okay, let me just see from the written questions here, since we're going back and forth in written and raised hands. I see a lot of questions that are very company specific. So I'm not inclined to sort of go after those.
So there's one right at
I see one question, maybe, Dave, where he's asking, we have 12 months of runway. When should we start raising? So look, we typically always say, even in a normal market, that you should start raising when you have 12 months of runway left. And even though rounds last year came together in as quick as 4 to 6 months, that's in an exceptionally good market. The challenge right now is that I would say the next 3 months people will say they're open for business, but if you really push comes to shove, and they have to take it to their ICs, and I think Dave has already commented on this, they're actually not really open for business. So this is a tough one. I would say, one, think about, is there ways to kind of extend 12 months to 15 to 18 months? And I would think that you'd want to probably launch in 2-3 months, hopefully some more clarity emerges, some more stability emerges. But if once you launch, only having kind of 9 months of runway is, in this current market environment, quite a scary prospect.
Great. Well, thank you all for this. Klaas, thank you for the presentation and then for your thoughts as well. Jayant, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Klaas and Dave. A huge round of applause, everyone. I think we have a lot of questions there which we might not have looked at, but we'll definitely get back to you. Someone from the THub team should get back to you with some sort of reply, hopefully, if they're relevant. And just to remind everyone, we actually have a webinar on Monday as well, which is an angel investor's perspective in the post-COVID-19 landscape. So it's kind of continuing on the sort of funding chain. The theme is winter coming? So for that, we have Digvijay Singh, CEO of India Angel Network, Sushanto Mitra, Chandran Krishnan, Sushanto Mitra, CEO of Lead Angels Network, Chandran Krishnan, CEO of the Chennai Angels, and Ratnakar Samavedam, the Investment Director of Hyderabad Angels. So please join us for that, everyone. Any closing remarks, Dev and Klaas? Otherwise, we can just close the session.
Good.
Thanks everyone for joining. So we'll send the feedback form again via email as well. So In case you haven't filled it out, please fill it out then. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Klaas.
Thanks. Bye. Stay safe. Stay healthy.